Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. I am your host, Shayna Terrell, educator activist dedicated to the freedom and liberation of her people. Shout out to all our co-conspirators out there watching who come back to support us week after week. And major shout out to all our new folks joining us today and being a part of Building the Black Educator Pipeline family. Today's theme, what we're going to get into today is talking about HBCUs and building a Black educator pipeline. So as we enter another collegiate school year, I thought it would be fitting to discuss how HBCUs are really important, play an important role in building the Black educator pipeline. As always, shout out to the Center for Black Educator Development and shout out to Citizens Ed for giving us this platform to talk to real people in the real struggle, doing the real work. So my guest today is always my guest every last Thursday of the month, my favorite Baba, our resident Baba, Dr. Greg Carr. And I'm always going to read his bio because our folks out there need to know the work this man is laying down and the legacies he's building and has built already. So Dr. Carr is an expert on the legacy of Black education and the co-founder of the Philadelphia Freedom Schools movement. Dr. Carr currently serves as an associate professor of Afro-American Studies, an adjunct professor at Howard Law, and a department chair of African Studies at Howard University. Dr. Carr led the creation of African American history curriculum now required for all Philadelphia youth within the public school system. He also served as the city's first resident scholar of race and culture in 1999. Dr. Carr has dedicated his career to Black history and education through scholarly work, lecturing around the world in media features which include BBC, NPR, CNN. He also is the co-host of his own YouTube series, In Class with Carr, which airs every Saturday at noon. So make sure y'all check my man out, okay? So let's welcome our resident Baba, Dr. Carr, to the show. What's up, Dr. Carr?
I'm so happy to see you, my dear beloved sister Shayna. This work is so important. I mean, every Thursday, and if y'all haven't been watching, you need to go back because all the discussions are right here on the Facebook page, on the YouTube page. Y'all go back and scroll through. This has been some of the most sustaining, informative, inspirational conversations, and sitting at the center of it is you, sis. So I love you. And thank you to you. Thanks to the Center for Black Educator Development. Thanks to Citizen Ed. Really, really is wonderful to be with you again on this Thursday.
Yes, Doc. And I want to holler at all my people out there who are watching, who are from HBCUs.
Come on, y'all.
My husband, Ron Brown, already started it off in the chat. I'm wearing a Dell State University
shirt. Dell State. See, I put on an Egyptian joint. I said I had the NT on a little earlier when I was with my students because we were talking about J.R. Smith, which I imagine we'll get into a little bit. You rock the Dell. It's so funny when I saw the current president of the United States and went down to the White House for the signing of the Juneteenth bill. My sister Ajwa, by the way, Asmawa, very, and I went and I shook his hand. It's before I could dig in on reparations and give Marcus Garvey a pardon. And it was only a second, right? But he was like, Howard University, yeah, that's the second best university, the HBCU in the country. He said number one was.
Who?
Where is he from? Dell State. So he said,
okay,
Delaware
so
State is the number one HBCU in the country. And I said, I ain't got a dog in that fight, Mr. President. I went to Tennessee State. So like Delaware State, I'm one of them HBCU field Negro graduates. So he was like, I was like, yeah.
I'm cracking up because I very rarely hear people from DSU. Most people I meet from DSU are super humble, right? They shout out their HBCUs, they're humble. But the people that I meet from like Howard, Clark, Atlanta, they're the ones who are always the number one HBCU. I didn't have the pleasure of going to HBCU. I went to a PWI, but when I'm around a bunch of folks who went to HBCUs, and I mean, the fight is real, okay? About which is the number one, the best, and the finest.
The fight is real. The fight is real till you go, as I tell students from Howard all the time. And I've been working at Howard now for 21 years. And thank God, I've been promoted to the faculty. I'm no longer department chair. I can go back to what I was doing before I had to take on administrative work, which is very excited about that. But I tell them all the time, everybody has the friendly beef on who's the best HBCU until y'all go to graduate school or professional school, at which point all the HBCUs come together and be like, we all HBCU graduates. So yeah, it's like I've seen that happen. I experienced that. And you're right. I mean, I'm a field nigga. I'm a public HBCU graduate. So Dell State, University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, Tennessee State, Grambling, Southern, all those public HBCUs. You know, we have our own, as the kids would say, we say less. We know it is. We know what it is.
That is funny. We say less. You already know.
You
already know.
You know what it is. No.
Yes. So folks like me out there, right, who had the experience of going to a PWI and later on in life meeting beautiful people from HBCUs.
Yes.
It's how I learned some of the history about HBCUs.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we have a lot of guests out there watching today who don't know the history, the legacy, or the background about HBCUs or how they even started. So I would love for you to get into that and just give us a little history, a little legacy on HBCUs.
Well, let's do it. Okay, thank you, sis. Let's do it real quick. Because I would encourage you all again to go back through the archive, this rich archive that Sister Shana has been curating week by week. Because we talked a little bit about this a couple of months ago, right? I think when we first started, maybe closer to when we first started kicking off the weekly Thursday noon conversations. But for those who will go back through the archive later, quick little couple of minutes summary: historically Black colleges and universities in the United States go back to the 1830s. And so, we've had a number of students, number of college age students as well, who have been members of the Freedom School movement in Philadelphia, who attended what is recognized as the first HBCU, although it did not start life as a higher education institution. And that's the one that was founded in South Philly in 1837, the Institute for Colored Youth, that shortly thereafter relocated outside the city of Philadelphia, and we know it now as Cheney University of Pennsylvania. The first institution that started as an institution for the training of teachers and for higher education is also in Pennsylvania. And that, of course, is the school known as Ashman Institute initially, and now we know it as Lincoln University. So Lincoln and Cheney are the first two HBCUs. And of course, they have a beef because Lincoln would say, well, y'all weren't really a university when it started. Okay, we don't even trip off that. But we know the point is that HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, predate the U.S. Civil War. And the first two were north of the Mason-Dixon line. Now, of the 104, 105 or so HBCUs in the United States, the vast majority of them are in the South. Shortly thereafter, shortly after those two, you have the grounding of another historically Black school, again, before the end of the Civil War, and that's out in Ohio, Wilberforce University, named for the British abolitionist William Wilberforce. But unlike Cheney, unlike Lincoln, Wilberforce was started by Black people. A lot of HBCUs were first initially kind of given their grounding, given their initial finances by white missionaries, white philanthropists. But in the case of Wilberforce, it was founded by the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And you kind of know the AME Church HBCUs by their names, because many of them are named for bishops of the AME Church. Allen University, Richard Allen, that's where Dave Chappelle's grandfather was and helped at that school. And in South Carolina, Bishop Isaac Lane, who's in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, that's in Tennessee. And if you think about, in fact, probably the most famous AME Church school is Morris Brown. Morris Brown was the second bishop of the AME Church. That's in Atlanta. And no, Morris Brown never closed its doors. In fact, it's reaccredited now under religious schools. And Coppin State, which is now a state school in Baltimore, but it's named for Levi J. Coppin. And of course, Fannie Jackson Coppin, his wife, was one of the principals of the Institute for Colored Youth. So that's the origins. The only thing I would say is that over the arc, over the now close to century and 2/3 of HBCUs, what you see is they have educated more Black doctors and lawyers and more Black folk who got college degrees. And up until Jim Crow, they were the primary place anybody Black could go for a degree in the United States. And now they continue to play that role. Although now with COVID, which I know we'll get into, everything in higher education has been disrupted. And some of these are historically Black colleges and universities are in danger. And we'll talk about why that is. But that's just a bit of a grounding. And if you want to read more, my old professor, Bobby Lovett, who was the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Tennessee State, a historian, wrote a beautiful book called America's Historically Black Colleges and Universities, A Narrative History, 1837 to 2009. This is probably the best single place to start for history of historically Black colleges and universities.
Because you always come with the books, bro. You just
It's my job.
always, I know, just encouraging us to read and seek that knowledge. Like,
no question. No question. We have to do it. We have to do it, Sister Shayna. That's when we're in this business, right? We can't have no educator pipeline, and the educators don't know nothing.
You don't read, you ain't researching, right?
No,
I know that's very need that.
That's right. Our ancestor Asa Hilliard used to say this all the time. He said to me, he said to everybody, he said, look, a teacher should have two things. One, they must have content mastery. You must know your subject. So it isn't enough to have a degree in math education. Do you know math? Well, I know how. No. Do you know some basic, And the second thing, which goes right along with it, they're inseparable, is a teacher must have the ability to help that student acquire that mastery. So it isn't enough that you know. You got to be able to demonstrate that to that student that they can begin to learn from you. So those two things make up and that's why we have to have a Black educator pipeline, because our babies need to see people like us who have that content mastery and who can help them acquire it.
Yes, and you put two things together that's important, right? Yes, building a Black educator pipeline, but part of that work is not just pumping out teachers, pumping out qualified teachers who are mastering in the content. I think that's super, super important. I remember when I first got into education, I felt like it was weird that there were teachers teaching subjects that didn't have a degree in the subject matter they were teaching. Right. I thought that super odd. I was like, so you went to PD for how long to learn this curriculum that you're teaching?
That's right.
But are you a master in the content, right? So you put two things together that are super important in building this pipeline: mastering the content and knowing how to translate that to children.
That's right. And in fact, some of our HBCUs, like Cheney, were created specifically to train Black teachers. My very good friend, Catherine Adams, Kathy Adams, who's down at Claflin in South Carolina, her father, school teacher, Cheney. Her mother, educator, Cheney. When you looked at the Philadelphia public schools, if you ran into a Black teacher in the Philadelphia public schools for decades, the odds are their college degree came from Cheney State College for Teachers.
Yep.
It's very serious. And Cheney had the highest standards. So any of y'all out there who ever get the urge to want to start, Cheney is not, oh no. The HBCUs had the highest standards of teacher education. No question. And Cheney leading the pack.
And the pride that when I met people who came from Cheney or the teacher college from Cheney, the pride that comes with that, I mean, is absolutely amazing.
That's right.
Absolutely amazing.
That's right.
So all my folks out there watching, if you are watching and you are a graduate of an HBCU, please shout your HBCU out in the comments. Please like, please share, but shout your HBCU out in the comments for us.
Please. Representing Fannie Jackson Coppin was a force. She was a whole beast. No question. Y'all gotta get Fannie Jackson. She wrote a memoir. A lot of people don't know, but if you get that, yes, get that Fannie Jackson Coppin. Oh, that sister. Yes.
Yes. Shout out to our JSOs who were down with Coppin Nation.
Yes.
It's an ode to Fannie. So shout out. But yes, please shout your HBCUs out in the comments, like and share. So Dr. Carr, you are teaching right now at an HBCU and you have been for like years. So you graduated from one, teaching at one. What are the benefits of attending an HBCU?
That's interesting. One is diversity. Very seriously, diversity. And as I said, COVID has disrupted everything. I remember in March 2020, when we first got the news that the campus was shutting down and the country got the news, I stood in the parking lot at Howard University. I made a little video, I posted online. I said, we're getting ready to jailbreak the Black university. Why? Because the old university's gone. It died. COVID killed it. The world we have now, like what we're doing right now, is part of the future. I don't like the fact that I'm not with my young people in person. However, one of the benefits of doing this is that I just left a class, Education in Black America, as we were talking about. There's about 100 students in there. And the diversity, that's number one, that was on that screen, we had such a conversation. I've got young people in there. Shout out to all of those young people. In fact, shout out to my man, Nigel Sanders, his father, Barry Sanders. Y'all probably know him. He won the Heisman, played for the Detroit Lions. Nigel is in that class. Students who are first generation, like I was, first generation in their family to go to college, right in class with students who are fourth, fifth, sixth generation. College students. So when you see a HBCU, people say, what is it like to go to an all-Black college? Number one, there is no such thing as an all-Black college these days, because it ain't just Black people at these schools. And number two, when you look at the Black people, The diversity is class diversity. It's geographical diversity. I asked my students today a question like, how many of y'all can get more than one passport? Put it in the chat. Again, technology. We're disrupting the Black university. All the different countries, Nigeria, Jamaica, Barbados, Ghana, England, for those who moved from West Africa to the Caribbean to England. Why? Because their parents came from there or they were born there and they can get more than one passport. We had a whole conversation about the sister who won a gold medal in Tokyo Olympics who ran under the Puerto Rican flag.
Yes.
Even though well, Puerto Rico, isn't that part of the United States? The International Olympic Committee knows that Puerto Rico is a colony. So they let them run under their flag. This sister, whose brother plays for Chicago Bears, who is a world-class athlete, you say, oh, she's American. Yeah, do you know how many millions of Black people speak Spanish and Portuguese?
Yes.
And so many of them are at the HBCUs.
Yes. It's
the most diverse. People say, well, HBCUs aren't diverse. They don't look like the real world. The real world is almost 9/10 non-white. HBCUs look more like the real world than the HWCUs, than the historically white colleges. So diversity is the first thing. And the diversity is also class diversity. People who struggling to pay the bills. And that's why I say we got to jailbreak the Black university and all universities, because COVID killed the cost structure. You can't keep these tuition costs so high, this room and board high. I believe that many of these universities reopened because they need the money from room and board. But the simple fact of the matter is that you've got students who are struggling with financial aid, struggling with student loans, right next to students who can write the check and not think about it.
And not even think, not blink.
Not even blink. And they become the best of friends.
I appreciate that you use that word, that you use the word diversity. Yes. Because we might have folks watching right now that's not skin folk, and they need to understand that their use of diversity and what that actually means, right? So when you are in a room full of Black people, it's still a diverse room. That's right. So I completely appreciate that you pointed that out, that one of the benefits of attending the HBCU is definitely diversity.
That's right. In fact, we should say this, Shannon. At HBCU, diversity does not mean a pair of ethnic earrings on a white frame. Let me be very clear for those who need to understand that. In this country, in the United States, when we talk about diversity, what we're really talking about is accentuating whiteness. Let's drop a few non-white people in to enhance the experience of white people and also benefit those other people. At a HBCU, I had a lot of white students at HBCU. I went to school with white students at Tennessee State back in the 80s, and I teach white students at Howard, but also Asian students, also students who will be considered from the so-called Middle East, students from Latin America who are not of African descent, students from the Caribbean who are not of African descent. But here's the thing, that is real human diversity.
Yes.
Often in America, when we say diversity, what we mean is white people and a few non-whites to make it look like we've made progress. But in fact,
integrating whiteness, right?
Like integrating whiteness and or even accentuating it, not even integrating, because it stays white.
It does stay white.
It's got the kente on and maybe a couple of programs, and there's a soul food day in the cab. Look, we're diverse. Oh no, I'm sorry. And everybody on the football team and basketball team and running track. But,
hello.
And the valedictorians, yes, who you brought, but the rest of them Negroes, you go fend for yourself. But guess what? I'm at the HBCU. Y'all come on with us. We know what it is. We know what it is.
Definitely know what it is. Definitely know it is. And I mean, you already got into some of this. What would you say are some of the major differences between the HBCU and the PWI?
Well, the first thing is we don't have to fight for our humanity. And that's important because, of course, after I left Tennessee State, got my degree, I got a law degree from the Ohio State University and a master's degree there in Black Studies. And then I went to Temple. And that's how we all ended up in Philly. That's how I did that with my adopted hometown and yours too. I know you New Yorker through and through. You got to represent.
Shout out, South Bronx, shout out.
Shout out, you know what I'm saying? But for me, a kid from the South, lived in the Midwest and then coming to the East Coast. Yeah. We know that the East Coast, as the young people say, it just hit different. You know what I'm saying? And Philly hit different, even I'm sure for you as a New Yorker. Philly is wild. Philly is like Baltimore. These are southern towns in the north.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? What are these southern Negroes doing up here with the Gators and this sound of Philadelphia? And so the beautiful thing about one of the differences between HBCUs and HWCUs, the white schools, is that at the white schools, you find Black students often having to fight to defend their Blackness. A discussion of race is brought up in the class. Everybody looked at them to be the expert. What? I don't know nothing about that. Or the food, from the food in the caf to the living arrangements in the dorms. At Ohio State, I was in law school. We used to go as law students and serve and sit in with undergraduate Black students at Ohio State. It was a very small population of Black, 50,000 people at Ohio State students and maybe 5,000 undergrads. And maybe half that number, 2,500 or so professional students. They would recruit professional students, but the undergraduate numbers were unacceptably low. And we would go represent these students because in case after case, they would be in a dorm and their white roommate might say, well, can I touch your hair? Or why don't you wash your hair every day? Or get into it. And just leave me alone. Then it'd be a fight. Now they want to suspend these Black students. And no, y'all not going to do that. I mean, so, and some of it was honest questions that just went left.
Yes.
And so, but at a
because
point,
you never experienced the Black person or Black culture. Now here we go.
Exactly.
Now here we go. Now I'm the lab rat.
I am the lab rat. In fact, one of the brothers who wrote one of the histories of the history of Black psychologists, the name of his book was "Even the Rat Was White." When you go into the lab to do your research, even the rat was white. In other words, you know what I'm saying? But at a HBCU, there's going to be beef. But here's one of the current beefs. We were in freshman seminar yesterday, and I raised it just to see. I said, in the chat, who wins the Jollof Wars? So all the Nigerians, all the Ghanaians, it's my river. I said, that's a beautiful beef. Why? Because you're not arguing over being Black.
Yes.
You're having fun with your differences. The skaters, the comic book, the anime, for anything anybody else does, Black people do too. But the difference between a Black school and a white school is you're not defending your humanity every day. You're not got your, no. If you don't like somebody, you just don't like them.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? But it ain't because you Black, because they're white. And that releases you then to begin to explore your humanity. I think that is the fundamental difference, and that makes all the difference. It
definitely makes all the difference. To not be in a space where you feel like you are constantly defending your Blackness.
That's right.
I think that it makes all the difference. To be in a space where people do understand you, understand your culture. And I'm cracking up about the question about hair, right? Because they are innocent, innocent questions.
Innocent questions.
But you're like, girl,
you can't just touch my hair, right? I mean, some would even ask. They say, "Oh, wait a minute, hold on. I'm not a doll. I'm not. This isn't a zoo." But that exact, and if you know, it's interesting because I teach a class over at the law school, Howard Law School, and I see somebody in the chat is talking about this now. Their daughter's coming to Howard Law School. I may have them in class, and I was with my students last night. I've been going in person because it's a small class, but I'm doing virtual now for the bigger classes in the undergraduates. This is the first time in 11 years, I think. This is my 11th year of teaching at the law school, where I've had a class where every student is one Latinx student in there. But other than that, and even then, not white. But this is the first time in 11 years teaching that class, both semesters, so 22 classes, where I haven't had one Black student who went to an HBCU undergrad. What you find at Howard Law School is that many of the law students are students who went to white schools undergrad who now want to come to professional school and get the Black college experience. And so that becomes a fascinating other kind of conversation. In fact, let me tell you a quick story. There was a brother who played football at a white school. He is now on the law review at Howard Law School. He tore his ACL and that shut his dream down of going to the league. And that's when he turned to books to begin to aspire. But he emphasized the fact that at that institution, they wanted him for his body. And so he surprised them and he said, but had I not torn my knee up, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. Because I got serious about school. And he said, I'm not going to repeat this mistake. So when it came time for law school, he applied to Howard, one of the top students at Howard Law School on the Howard Law Review. But my point is, that's what happens in law, in dentistry, in medicine, in social work, in religion, divinity. These are the professions at the professional level. Black students come to the HBCU. And most HBCUs don't have all those programs, but Howard does. FAMU has a law school. Texas Southern has a law school. North Carolina Central has a law school. Miles College, a lot of people don't know, in Birmingham, Alabama, has a law school. But a lot of times they go there for that. Meharry Medical School, Morehouse School of Medicine, Howard School of Medicine, Charles Drew, which isn't typically thought of as a historically Black college, but it is a predominantly Black school in LA. And that's another category. Chicago State and Chicago, these are what they call PBIs, predominantly Black institutions. Medgar Evers in Brooklyn is another one like that. So they don't call them HBCUs because they weren't started back in the day, but they are predominantly Black. And those are important. We should always include them in the conversation.
Yeah, shout out to my sister who graduated from Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn.
I love Medgar Evers. Shout out to Brenda Green, the director of the Center for Black Writing. Her son, we all know him, of course, Talib Kweli. Talib's mother, Brenda Green, Dr. Brenda Green, runs the Center for Black Writing at Medgar Evers College.
Oh, dope.
Lurie Favors, a lawyer, very important, runs the Center for Social Justice. I mean, Medgar Evers I love Medgar Evers. I love that. Medgar Wiley Evers College, no question.
But what's so sad, but at the same time exciting about this conversation, all the opportunities and promise that exist at HBCUs, right?
Yes.
But then our children in our communities almost know absolutely nothing about them. What is happening now, though, which is great, is word on the street is that the enrollment at HBCUs are soaring. What do you think in undergrad HBCUs? What do you think sparked that?
Shout out to the killer of Breonna Taylor, the killers of George Floyd. And by shout out, I mean, we know your names and time is long. But at any rate, the response to that, the killers of Mike Brown, the killers of Sandra Bland, like she committed suicide. We know what it is. Sandra Bland, in fact, the day that cop stopped her, she was on her way to a new job in Texas. She had relocated. Sandra Bland was getting ready to take a job. I think it was Prairie View College. So she was going to a job at an HBCU. But I think, and there are two things. Number one, enrollment isn't soaring everywhere. That's important to distinguish. Howard, Morehouse, Spelman, these schools, class plays a big role within HBCUs. It's not polite to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it because I have to. I mean, again, I went to a field Negro HBCU, and I'm very clear about that.
Okay.
While I enjoy and love Howard being there because I'm part of an intellectual genealogy with some of my heroes who are now ancestors, the great Ron Walters, the great Leslie Hicks, elders who are still around like Eleanor Traylor. To say I'm on the same faculty that Charles Drew was on and Charles Hamilton Houston, I mean, you don't get no better than that. But at the same time, I understand how class operates. So there's a short list of HBCUs that some Black people in this country would say, you ain't going to no Black college, except these four or these three. And so if you see in terms of social class and economic class, okay, I got into Stanford, I got into NYU, University of Chicago, but I picked Howard. I got into University of Texas at Austin. I had to decide Cal Berkeley. I chose Spelman. I got into Columbia. I was thinking about Dartmouth, but I went to Morehouse. Though that's one conversation. But those schools that don't have big endowments, and that's most HBCUs. If you're a private school HBCU, some of them are struggling now. If you're a public HBCU, remember most of them are in the South. They are trapped by these racist legislators in the South who are slashing all the budgets in public education, not just Black schools. But unlike a University of North Carolina, where you can make that up with alumni support and they writing grants and that, maybe a Winston-Salem State, with my friend Elwood Robinson, the provost there, the chancellor there, and others, they can't make that money up on the alumni side because our graduates don't have that kind of earning power. So you see the budget shrink and maybe the tuition goes up a little bit more. Those schools might not be seeing a surge in enrollment because still affordability is a big deal in higher education. Public HBCUs are still much more affordable than private ones. But if you don't have any money, then, if you have to work anyway, college may not be an option. So that's number one. But the surge and the interest, this is why the Black Educator Pipeline is indispensable. Because, and we had this conversation, actually, I was having this conversation with my law students last week when we were talking about education and the law. A lot of them never heard of a roster chair. I learned a roster chair working under Cassandra Jones at the School District of Philadelphia when I was her assistant. And she called a meeting of all the roster chairs. The roster chair, of course, as we know, and some of you all might not know, that's the name for it. It was the name for it in Philly. That's the person in the building in the high school that helps decide what classes.
Who gets what classes, yes.
No question. And when I walked in the room, there was only there were 3 Black people in that room. At that time, I think there may be 22, 23 high schools in Philadelphia. Cassandra Jones, the sister that called the meeting, me, her assistant, and the sister who was the roster chair at William Penn High School that ain't there no more. Everybody else was a white man, and most of them older. And I'm saying, these are the cats that pick your schedule. You got to understand the power of we need a pipeline because we need more roster chairs. And the other element is the guidance counselors. How many students don't know about HBCUs because the guidance counselors don't know, or they're a high performing student, or they want to go to a HBCU, and the guidance counselor tells them, like I was told at Hillsborough High School in Nashville, Tennessee, the white guidance counselor, yeah, you don't want to think about Tennessee State. You want to go maybe to Middle Tennessee State, where it's at. Now, my heart was set on Tennessee State because I wanted to be in the marching band. I was a drum major in the band in high school, and I want to be an aristocrat because I'm a family in Tennessee State. And then we had black guidance counselors. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Miss Giddings and them. They was like, nah, baby, Tennessee State. You going to don't let them talk. The power of a guidance counselor is real. We need a black educator pipeline. I mean, Bobby Melky talks about it all the time, and y'all talk about it all the time. Teachers, educators, counselors, roster chairs who are former teachers who then teaching and become a roster chair. These are decision makers that can send the child's life left or right with the point of
yes.
And so that we have that's so some, but the enrollment surges as we get more people in the pipeline to expand awareness.
Yes. And I love how you connected it to social justice that's happening right now. Right? Like the awareness, just the sheer awareness are prompting conversations about what HBCUs are and the benefit. And you're so right? When you talk about HBCUs, I dare to see, you might know the exact numbers of HBCUs that exist. Like you might know that off the top of your head. Do you?
Yes, 104 or 105 now. Yeah.
Look at that.
But it's interesting. The number hasn't changed. This is a book. It's very interesting. This book, let me see if I have. Oh, yeah. This is a book that was published by a former dean at Tuskegee, Irving Derbigny. This is called General Education in the Negro College. This is 1947. Starts the book by talking. He says, today there is 1947. There are 118 such institutions enrolling over 40,000 students and conferring over 6,000 degrees annually. This is 1947. The number hasn't really diminished, but those that have gone out of business has typically been financial.
Yep.
Or they've merged. Straight University now, Dillard, my friend Walter Kimbrough, who's just announced that he's retiring as president. He's leaving as president of Dillard after 10 years. Mary Schmidt Campbell at Spelman has just announced that she's stepping down. It's very interesting. And then you have this other phenomenon. You have black presidents at some white schools.
Yes.
Freeman Robowski, who was one of the great master teachers who ran the University of Maryland, Baltimore College, just announced that he is retiring. He came out of Birmingham, Alabama. HBCU graduate, and he turned UMBC into, for some years, many years, the #1 producer of black and non-white graduates who go on to get doctoral degrees in the science. He's a STEM guy. But and then finally you have some HBCUs that are historically black, but no longer predominantly black. The two that come to mind are in West Virginia, Bluefield State and West Virginia State College. West Virginia State, that's Katherine Johnson. When you watch the movie Hidden Figures, it's wonderful to see those sisters. It's important. But ask yourself a question. Did they just drop out of the sky doing math? They went to black schools.
Right. They wasn't the magnificent Negroes, right? Like, where they came from?
Magnificent, magical, adding up Negroes. No. Two things. Katherine Johnson, a lot of them who went on to get graduate degrees, they went to HBCUs. Howard was the first black doctoral program in math in the country. You have several of those hidden figures who got degrees from Howard graduate degrees. And the second thing is, go back and look at the movie. The whole movie was shot. NASA, that's Morehouse. The whole campus. She's running from one building in Morehouse to another one. And when you see Janelle Monáe get that degree, because she fights to get into the University of Virginia at graduation, I'm laughing. Why? Because in the yard, she gets the degree and they say, oh, she got a degree. When you look behind her, there's a statue there. That statue is Benjamin Elijah Mays. Benjamin and Sadie Mays are buried on the campus of Morehouse College. They literally shot the movie on an HBCU campus. And the whole movie somehow figures out a way to talk about the hidden figures and never talk about where they went to school. But except the University of Virginia. Come on.
But see, this is why you like a low-key national treasure. And I'm saying that because nobody would be making these connections, right? Like no clue, no idea, and all this knowledge that you haven't possessed. Like I said, I was like, let me dare to ask you how many HBCUs actually exist. Of course, you're gonna know.
That's easy because they've hovered at that same number for a few years, and there have been some closings, unfortunately, over the arc of our lifetimes. But they cover that. But I must say this again, Shannon, just in 30 seconds. This COVID is going to have an impact. Many of our HBCUs are struggling. I mean, if you ask that same question, if we ask that same question 5 years from now, I'm not confident at all it will still be over 100.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. As we were talking about the vaccine mandates that are coming out and things like that, if people are deciding they're not going to get them, what does that mean for revenue for some of these colleges, right? And here we know tons of HBCUs who just can't afford to not have the revenue because they don't have the backing of legislation, they don't have the backing of the state, they don't have these large endowments and people pouring into them. There are a lot of really small HBCUs who don't have that support. So, like as you name 105, right? People most of the time hear about 10. Right? They hear about 10 to 20 maybe HBCUs, and you saying there's 105 that exist out there.
That's right.
So for the other HBCUs that are existing, again, many of them are really small colleges. They are going to struggle without the revenue of full tuition. So
no question. And many of those are private schools, and some of them are private schools that were founded by and started and sustained by Black institutions, particularly the Black church. Everybody has heard of the singing group Take Six, for example. That's Oakwood College, Seventh-day Adventist, Black Seventh-day Adventist, as in Little Richard. Yes, Little Richard was Seventh-day Adventist. Oakwood College, who performed down there, that's a whole nother level of commitment.
Yes,
and the AME Church helped keep Morris Brown afloat, but the AME Church also has Wilberforce. The AME Church has Allen. The CME Church, as I said, has Lane College. But when you don't have money, this economy, what happens when you're Stillman? What happens when you're Hines Community College in Mississippi, where they have been basically, those Black colleges in Mississippi have been under assault for years. Lawsuits, the Ayers versus Fordyce suits. In fact, they just had a rally in Jackson. Alvin Chambliss, one of the great lawyers of our time, in my estimation, because is fighting because, among with others, Mississippi Valley State. If y'all never heard of Mississippi Valley, you've heard of probably the most famous athlete graduate, the great Jerry Rice. And I'm telling you right now, because I was in school the same time they were. Joe Montana of the San Francisco 49ers is not the best quarterback to ever throw to Jerry Rice. That brother's name would be Willie Satellite Totten. I saw them Negroes put up like a 68 spot on Tennessee State in Indianapolis at the Circle City class. They just kept going back playing pitch and catch. Who is this Negro? But my point is that Valley is in danger of closing because when the lawsuits were filed to dismantle the dual system of higher education in Mississippi, they said, the state of Mississippi must place, what the court said, must place some key majors and key programs at the Black schools to drive other enrollment there. Valley got a nursing program. Well, the white schools decide they're going to start one anyway, or take the one from Valley. That's what's called a dual system of higher education. In Maryland, they did the same thing. There was an executive MBA program that Morgan State got. University of Maryland was like, we're going to start one. The courts was like, you can't do that. That's because that's the reason we gave it to Morgan. It was like, sue us. So they went to court in Maryland. They just settled a couple of months ago, $500 million with the 4 Black schools over the next 10 years. But in Mississippi, Valley's enrollment begins to decline. Why? Because the white students and others in Mississippi who would go take nursing at Valley, they took the nursing program. This thing is real, y'all. It ain't just the private Black schools that are struggling. Some of these public ones could be struggling too. And it's because of these closed-minded white nationalist legislators are in the South, which is why everybody who can, you should register and vote. Not because voting is the solution, but it's a weapon in our toolbox. People with goodwill have to fight back because they're cutting budgets, and that may be why some of these HBCUs in the South
are struggling, and that's sad. That's super sad to hear. And with you drawing the parallels just between the dual education system, it always brings me to, of course, we're out here building a Black educator pipeline. Like, why don't you think more resources are put into HBCUs to produce more Black teachers? So you'll see. I think A&T is the #1 producer of engineers. And then you've already talked about the amount of Black lawyers and Black doctors that come out of HBCUs. Now, granted, there are teachers that come out of HBCUs. I'm not saying that. But there's this whole movement right now to diversify the education pipeline, get more Black and Latinx students into education. But we'll see the things that happen at a school like Cheney, where Cheney then lost their money, almost lost their accreditation, had to fight to get that back. But they were the #1 producers of Black teachers at a time. When there has already been an assault right on Black teachers after Brown versus Board of Education.
That's right.
So why wouldn't they put more resources in schools like Cheney or other places to really support the production of more Black teachers? Just curious about your take on that.
Well, I'll be quite candid with you. Of course, we candid. America doesn't value education. America values, in a capitalist society, it values profit. It values money. And so it's not going to invest in people. This is the war that's being fought in legislators around the country, including the federal legislature here in Washington, D.C. Are you going to invest more in education because it's an investment in people? The answer is, do I need to invest more in people to make money? No. This was a war at Black schools from the beginning. The split in HBCUs and in the K-12, what we now call the K-12 movement.
Yep.
There were white philanthropists, white industrialists, early white corporate leaders who said these Negroes need to be trained in the manual arts, need to be trained to labor hard in the South, make sure they don't leave the plantations, pay them as little as possible. And we will have schools that have teachers that train them in the trades. And that and kind of the face of that, in some ways, it's more complicated than this, but I'll use this as a shorthand since we only have a minute or two, is Booker T. Washington. The whole idea of what they call the Hampton idea. We're reading a book called The Education of Blacks in the South, James Anderson's book in my Education in Black America class. And we're talking about the Hampton idea, Tuskegee being one of the examples. And of course, it's more complicated than that. On the other side is the idea, no, they have to have training in the liberal arts. We must take them the Greek and the Latin and the mathematics and all this stuff. That has been associated more with W.E.B. Du Bois, although kind of unfairly. Du Bois went to Fisk, of course, in Nashville, Tennessee. But there are others who kind of, had that attitude as well. Moving from that to the general conversation, by the way, curriculum planning at Black schools among these philanthropists, they would meet. And one thing that wasn't allowed to be in the conversation was Black people. Capon Springs, West Virginia, they met. Lake Mohonk, New York. In fact, y'all can get a book called The Lake Mohonk Conferences. They met in New York, late 19th century. Let's plan this curriculum. Except they didn't have any Black people there. You know what I'm saying? And then later, you get these first Black educators coming out of the end of the Civil War. Philly, y'all know this name, Richard Robert Wright. Richard Wright. His mother, Harriet, walked them out of a field in Cuthbert, Georgia to go to Atlanta, to go to school. He comes out of Atlanta University, ends up being the president of Savannah State before he leaves, goes to Philadelphia and starts the bank in Philadelphia. When he was a little boy, General Howard came in the room where they were, all these Black students. He said, what do you want me to tell your white friends in the North who are helping pay for this? They said, Richard Wright raised his hand and said, tell them we're rising. So they called him the Black boy of Atlanta. He told Howard, tell him we come for that #1 spot. His granddaughter became the superintendent of the Philadelphia schools. And when Ruth Wright Hare was the superintendent of schools, she made the motto of the Philadelphia public schools, tell them we're rising. That came from her grandfather who came. But my point I'm trying to make with this is teacher education would be funded if it was valued, but it is not valued. So at HBCUs, finally, what we have to do is prepare ourselves. Howard has a principal institute to help develop principals in his College of Education. There are teacher education programs. There are a number of HBCUs that have them, but our messaging at HBCUs is terrible because we have young people often think that being a teacher is not only not a good profession, it's not a well-paying profession. It's an abused profession. People don't respect teachers. We have to reset back to them old days. When you were a teacher, this is like you are a boss.
Like that is the profession. So I'm gonna give a little hint, a little prelude to what we're doing here at the center. Just so everybody look out for September 9th, we'll be launching our national high school campaign. We need Black teachers. So just look out about that. But just the re-education, the reacclimating, and the exposure to the teacher profession for young people and what that means. One of the greatest myths is that teachers are being a teacher is not lucrative. Now, again, that's not to go to say that teachers aren't underpaid. Like, let's be clear.
You ain't gonna get rich.
Let's be clear, right? You're not gonna get rich. Teachers certainly deserve more. And that's a fact. But to say, oh, if you go into teaching, you're going to be poor. That's not absolutely true. That's not true.
You have to understand, when you are a teacher, and I'm not talking about teachers who are substitute teachers, because that's the other thing. And in college, it's adjunct labor. We abuse adjuncts, and we got to do something about that. But if you are an appointed teacher in a school system, think about the things that aren't paycheck, but are security.
Yes.
Care, for example.
Yep.
Retirement, for example.
Retirement.
And with all the problems in teachers,
summers off.
No, summers, right? Where you can, you know what I'm saying? But with all the problems in unions, and there are many problems with organized labor.
Yes,
that's why we have to be involved in organized labor to reform it. But let's be clear: if you're getting paid at a certain scale, it's because organized labor banged on it. Now, that don't mean we have real problems with organized labor, but when you become a teacher, that's very different than a hit or miss profession, or one where you got to pay for your own health care out your own pocket, this kind of thing. So there are many benefits to teaching that are in that column of, okay, I'm just thinking about the money. Okay. Because somebody told you a lie about teaching. Right.
Yes, they did. And I always say that to kids, like, well, who told you that? Or why do you think that? Why
well, part of it, I think, Shana, is because in school buildings, children are just younger humans. Children are learning all the time. When you see how teachers are treated by administrators, these children picking up notes and they're thinking to themselves, I would never want to be in front of a classroom with me in it.
Well, I talk about that a lot too, how schools are the places of trauma or where children lead trauma. So sometimes we talk about this whole trauma-informed approach. You are a part of the trauma. And creating these narratives in children's heads about teaching. The funny thing though, right, we talk about this, and I want people to be clear on this. We're talking about this from a Black perspective because white children don't have that same kind of myriad of what schools are.
Depending on class. Depending on class.
But saying that to say in terms of, right, like the profession is dominated by white women.
No question.
Somewhere along the lines, their positive relationship with school or what they see a teacher as, right, and what's the teaching profession is presented to them versus what is presented to Black people and Black children. There's a stark difference in that. So I agree with you completely. The way teachers are treated by administration and children have to see the fallout of that. But that doesn't happen in every community. But I wanted to point that out to be clear. Like, we're talking about this from a Black perspective lens.
That's a very important, you just said a whole word.
Yes, everybody's not unified in that same struggle. Again, and this conversation is not to say that teachers are paid so well. Like, they're underpaid. It's definitely an underpaid profession, but it is still a profession where you can work and have somewhat of, when you're living in America, somewhat of a decent middle class kind of life if you do it right. Not going to
put a down payment on your house.
You
get y'all right.
You can do okay. You can do okay being a teacher, but I think a lot of times, yes, these misconceptions are put out to children, and the profession is not easy. It's not easy, but I think, again, also, if we draw out the rewards, sometimes the rewards are greater than the risk. The impact that you have. And I tell people, of course, you know this, like being a teacher is like one of the most, if not the most important job in the world, because you are controlling the minds of the young. You are certainly controlling the minds of the next generation.
You're exposed.
Pouring into them.
That's right. Our sister, in fact, I see our sister here, but in Jamele with Starry Mansion, every year she brings a gang of students to Howard. And they're reading, sometimes they're reading the same book we're reading. They come to Education in Black America class. Her own daughter, attended Clark Atlanta as a graduate of Howard University, is now educated with you. Of course, y'all at the
center. My girl, Asha Ray.
Yes, Asha Ray. So I see in Jamele in the chat, what you just said, Shana, is so important because she has shaped many young minds. And there are many teachers like that who go out of their way to make sure those young people get that exposure. And you're right. That's the teacher that makes a difference in the life of a
child. And those are the people that we're trying to recruit, train, and retrain and retain in this Black educator pipeline. People understand what the mission is. Okay, you got a mission, and we want you to accomplish that. You got a mission, so we want people to understand the assignment. So that's who we want in our clutches and in our box.
That's right. I see Chiquita's in the chat. She's in Columbus. Yeah, I lived in Columbus. My man John Stanford, I went to law school with him. He ended up, I think he's in the state of Ohio. He's deputy superintendent, one time superintendent of schools. Columbus, Ohio, of course, is just about an hour north of Wilberforce and State University. And there was always a connection there. A lot of our Black populations in the North would send their children back to where they migrated from. So I went to school with a lot of people from Chicago, Detroit, and Tennessee State. The Southern legislators started putting caps on the percentage of out-of-state students who could come south, but it wasn't to stop white students who were coming from the North to go south to school. It was to stop the number of Black students whose families were sending them back south to HBCUs because they had migrated during the migration from Mississippi to Chicago, from Alabama to Detroit, and they were sending their children back. The Speller family, I remember them, the Spellers, they were all less than them. They were all from Chicago. The guy was a drum major. He was also a member of the Vice Lords in Chicago.
Yes,
he was a freshman in Tennessee State. He was in the band with me. They called him Snake. That was his nickname. My point is that when we think of those pipelines in Columbus, Ohio, in Detroit, in Cincinnati, in Philly, in places, a lot of times who's in the building will determine whether that child even knows. And this pipeline that y'all are building and unveiling, please, y'all, we got to support this. Because if you can't change the workforce of the teaching force overnight, you can certainly 1 by 1, 5 by 5, 3 by 3 begin to put people in buildings. And sometimes it only takes 1 or 2.
Yes. And we trying to do this. We're trying to affect generations upon generations to understand the importance of teaching. And I often wonder, and I wonder if you ever thought about this too, do you think that the teaching force, the number of Black teachers, could go back to the way it was pre-Brown versus Board of Education? Because that's when it was like we was lit, right? We was on fire then.
Well, it's interesting because there always been good old days, and then there never been good old days. Because the thing is, we never had the resources. We were always under the gun. However, and we talked about this before, I think, when you look at the Little Rock Nine, America wants Black people to be sacrificial lambs. And so you see these high school students marching in Little Rock Central High School, and nobody asks, except us, Black people, well, where did they go to school before that? Did they just start going to high school? No.
They had a school.
They had the best Dunbar High School in Little Rock, and then the school that came right after it, Horace Mann. These are the Black schools they went to. Now, can we go back to the days when the principal was Black or the teachers were Black? Probably not. However, what we can do is build out spaces where sometimes, like I say, in Sankofa Freedom Academy, you're gonna have mostly Black teachers, or in them hotel, the public charter school. Sometimes you only have a handful of non-white teachers in the building. But the HBCUs, again, the faculty is diverse, not just Black faculty. But I guess the last thing I'll say is this country is dissolving. And by that, I mean it's going to reform.
It is.
What we see now, and I was telling my law students this last night, what we're seeing in these Southern legislators, they're against CRT and all this stuff. What they're doing looks a whole lot like the 1860s and 70s and 80s in this country. It looks like the period of Reconstruction. White nationalism looks more like the 1860s, 70s, and 80s than it does 2021. But except this time, there ain't no World War I and World War II coming to revive the economy. There is no migration and expanding economy that's going to make them have to make some concessions to the Black elite. This time we're going to beef. And what we understand is that any human being of goodwill has to stand against white nationalism. And one of the solutions is for us to take very seriously the training of our children.
Yes.
And that means if you're out there thinking, I wouldn't be a teacher, I hadn't thought about it, you should think about it.
Yes.
Because the children you're preparing now are going to build a different country than even the one we live in.
And people have to draw that connection and that parallel. Like if you don't teach your children, somebody else will. And most likely it will be the enemy. And remember, and you got to think about the people who trained them, right? Yes. And that's who we have training our kids. Yes. So definitely when we think about teaching and what that means and what that breeds, people at home right now, you got teenagers, you got freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors. Talk to them about the importance of teaching. Talk to them about the importance of attending the HBCU for that matter, because of the training they're going to get, the mindset that they will form. Doing this work has exposed me to so many, again, a diverse group of Black people. And when I lived in the world of like righteousness and freedom, and we going out here, everybody about freedom and liberation, I learned very quickly, like, no, they're not. And not because they don't want to. So many people just weren't exposed to that kind of information or that kind of lifestyle, or had babas like you, or had parents like mine, who, taught them about the movement and your important, and again, your importance, right? In that.
That's right.
And you have a mission. You got to accomplish that. You know the assignment, like you on this earth to do this work for freedom and liberation. But I've met so many people who just were not exposed to that.
Well, you say that, Shana, because you're absolutely right. We were fortunate, you and I, to have families and communities that kind of helped us understand that. So when we saw it again later in life, we said, this is what we've been looking for. Yes. Our young people now live in an environment we didn't grow up in. Social media, TikTok, all this stuff. So celebrity has even become even more outsized, which is why I was talking about this earlier. And by the way, all my students in my Education in Black America class, I told them we were going to have this conversation. They was like, yeah. So they jumped in with all kind of comments, and we covered a lot of stuff we talked about. But one of the things we talked about today was J.R. Smith.
Yes.
The NBA champion basketball player, Cleveland Cavaliers, and then played other teams, Lakers. He enrolled in college for the first time because he went straight from high school. He was going to play for Roy Williams in North Carolina, but he skipped that, went right to the league. He's now a student at North Carolina A&T, and he is a student. So, and that has happening more and more these days. I mean, Nick Cannon was my student at Howard. I mean, now y'all set aside all the Nick Cannon slander. That's my man. So whatever y'all gonna say, but I can tell you, Nick came to class. Me and Nick had a independent study every week. We read a different book. He read so many books. J.R. Smith, I was reading a long article. J.R. Smith's gonna play golf for North Carolina A&T. He wants to play golf, but he said his favorite class so far is African Studies. He's tweeting about writing papers. He's because he got all the money. So those of you think, oh, you're only going to school to make money. No, you go to school to get education.
Okay, that's right.
And that sparked a whole conversation with my students about why they came to school. Yes, you come to better your life. Yes, you come to better your community's life. But you should never forget the purpose of education is to become better human. As ancient Egyptians say, to be more human in the world. And J.R. Smith, because of his celebrity and taking that stand, he said Chris Paul, the basketball player's brother, called him and said, let me help you make the connection to A&T. Why? Chris Paul back in school. I know Winston-Salem State. He went to play basketball for Wake Forest, but all his family then went to HBCUs in North Carolina. He just finished playing for the NBA championship, and he is enrolled online at Winston-Salem State. And he rocks Winston-Salem State stuff at the press conference. Even Allen Iverson from Hampton Roads, Virginia, when he was playing for the Sixers, you would see him rock HBCU stuff. In fact, we would know Allen Iverson at Georgetown because you know who pardoned him? The governor of Virginia at the time, Douglas Wilder, a graduate of Howard University School of Law, the first black governor of Virginia, said, we got to get this boy a chance. And that's
look out for that brother.
Came and got him. So you don't have to go to HBCU to rep a HBCU. And the platform, I think, is driving.
You don't.
Look at
it. You don't. At all.
No doubt.
No doubt. But I mean, we can get into this in another conversation or topic. I went to Temple, and there was that whole fight online about Temple saying use HBCU.
I saw those shirts. I wasn't mad.
The HBCU people was mad, child. They came for us, round ones, crack us up.
Let me say this, but with all due respect to folks who kind of got mad about that, there are many people, and Shana, you know this better than I do, who think Temple's an HBCU.
Yes,
because there are so many black students who come to Temple.
Well, over the years, if you go there now, you probably wouldn't say that. But I would say,
because I remember when it changed, no question.
Yeah, I would say from about 98, 99 to like 2008, 2009. Oh, baby, we had that campus. We was all over that thing.
And I graduated in 98. I was there from 92 to 98. Benny Boone was one of my students. Gerald Ross, the filmmaker. All these cats were at Temple.
It was live. And we took over that thing. And I'm saying took over that thing in the sense that our presidents for like student stuff, main campus program board, student government, they were black. So all the decisions at that time that were made for students were made in the interest and the likeness of black students. And it was just a wonderful time to be there. And I think what we were connecting to and what we were grasping to then, the experience that folks have at a HBCU, the ability to be in likeness and in company with black people.
That's right.
And be able to just be yourself and be black.
That's right.
Now, back then,
educator education is important in terms, even at Temple. I think of James Davis, Dean Davis, who's in the School of Education. Two of our close sisters, Kelly Sparrow Mickens and Aisha Imani, both got their doctorates in the School of Education at Temple University. So it's important to understand, but that black community at Temple, we saw the same thing at Ohio State. The Black Student Center, the Black Cultural Centers, the Black Student Unions, that's the self-defense place where it's not an HBCU, but you can protect yourself, and then you take advantage of the resources that are outside. So we got to fight this fight on all fronts.
Agreed, 100%. Felt some of the greatest times of my life was spent there, but because I had a very black experience. I remember saying to my mom, like, I'm from the projects, grew up in a black neighborhood, like, oh, I'm going to go to college. Like, oh, I finally get to experience white people. No, I didn't. Because that's all I was around. We were everywhere. I saw white people in class. I was a political science major then. I saw white people in class. That's where I saw white people at. Other than that, my entire social experience was black.
That's it.
But
and we're starting to see that Georgia State, for example, has now surpassed all the HBCUs in producing the largest number every year of black bachelor's degree holders in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a historically white school. My friend Akinyedu Moja, known for many years, my dear brother Baba AK, because it's in Georgia. It's a public school. The tuition is there, and so many black students that come to Georgia State that they feel like
going there. I know that's right. I know that's right. But I definitely want to say, and again, I'll repeat it again to everybody watching at home, all our co-conspirators, everybody out there, the importance of HBCUs in building this Black educator pipeline.
Yes.
Please consider HBCUs for your children.
Yes.
Please consider teaching as a valuable option for your children.
Yes.
Anybody out there interested in teaching, please make sure you visit the center's page just to see what we got going on and what we're doing. But to be able to really build out our next generation, we have to make sure we're rebuilding this Black educator pipeline.
We have to rebuild it. I'm so glad to be with you, sis. I see people.
Yes, I want to give you a few minutes to say something to the people before we get out of here.
My man Jose Pimenta Bay. I see somebody shouted him out at Berea College. That's where Carter G. Woodson went to school. I remember he was my big brother at Temple. In fact, both Ray Westbrook, Ray Muhammad, we were all in school at Temple and grad school. We both know a new Jose, so I know them. But I would just say this, and this is from my students to everybody watching. I just left them. But they told me, among other things, to tell y'all is that they are preparing, and that one of the reasons they chose a Black school is that they could prepare to help us achieve our ultimate victory. And so when you're at an HBCU and you have a room full of Black young people and you sharing with them and they're sharing with you, there's nothing like it in the world. And for those of you who are watching from overseas, I count as HBCUs, University of Ghana, Legon. I count the Federal University in Salvador, Bahia, the University of the West Indies, all the campuses, Mona Bay, Barbados, they're all HBCUs.
International, baby. That's right.
We are jailbreaking the Black. When we say Black University, we don't just mean the United States, baby. We are now, the technology going to take us everywhere. And to all the college administrators, y'all get this financial money thing right, because the old world ain't coming back. This tuition gonna have to be lowered or something, because now we're gonna start giving it away. Everybody got to be in this conversation. I love you, sis.
I love you too, Doc. Yes. Listen to all our folks out there, our co-conspirators, our new supporters. Thank you for watching and supporting this conversation today, especially you, Chiquita, for all the comments and engagement today. And shout out to all our folks and our family watching today. We love you guys. We appreciate y'all. And like and share. Remember to like and share this.
Like it.
That's right. Like and share this forum. But I will see you guys again next Thursday right here, same place, same time, for Building the Black Educator Pipeline.